Christmas comes but once a year, and therefore you'd have thought that by now in life I would have this well and truly sussed. I should be meticulously organised and beautifully planned, but it turns out that both you and I would be miraculously wrong in that regard. I am so deeply unprepared for the festive season this year, but the good news is the festive break is almost upon us, and I am so looking forward to a little bit of downtime, a little bit of rest and relaxation, and a chance to catch up on all things knitty. And so I'm looking forward to chatting about that with you. Now, if this is February and you're watching things out of sequence, or perhaps you're still catching up on things, or for whatever reason you've decided that this is the episode that you want to watch, I mean, seasonally inappropriate, but either way, Merry Christmas for this year or next year or sometime, or hey. Hello there, Pickles, and welcome to episode 35 of the Knitting Vicariously podcast. My name is Caroline. I'm found more commonly across Instagram and Ravelry as dunderknit. I'm a knitter living here in London, and if this is your first time joining us here on the podcast, a huge hello and welcome to you. A brief word of warning though, just up front, to let you know that this is a swearing friendly podcast, and therefore the language, it can get a little bit colourful, in line with the stash wall behind me. If that's not your bag, I totally understand and appreciate it. This won't be the podcast for you, but if you've been around for a while, or indeed if the notion of a swearing podcast kind of doesn't upset you, or indeed secretly kind of appeals to you, then you are more than welcome here. I really do hope you're all well. Yes, we are well and truly in the midst of full-on Decembering. The festive period is well and truly here, and this has been a bit of a jam-packed month between various different social obligations and office Christmas parties, former office Christmas parties, meeting up with friends, as this time of year so often tends to sort of suggest and bring on. It's been a lot. We also had the general election here in the UK, which was fun, and I used the word fun quite wrongly, but there we go. Yeah, but it's fair to say that a couple of things have suffered this month. One, I think just my liver more than anything. There's been quite a lot of drinking, not in a problematic sense, just in a volume sense, but it's fine. The knitting has also probably suffered a little as well, just in terms of amount of time that I've had to spend knitting. You will see that reflected in some of the whips and the content that I have to share, but also as well the time that I've had to be able to spend vlogging and podcasting and talking to you all too. So between meeting up with some friends last weekend, which was such a wonderful day, and I so enjoyed doing it, it does mean that this week's podcast is up a little bit later than normal, so apologies if you were looking forward to something last weekend and this episode wasn't around, but we are here now and we are festived up to the max. Other things to talk about, obviously the BLAMEDUNDERKNITALONG continues, and I continue to be so happy about everything that you are making at the moment. For anyone who is unaware, the BLAMEDUNDERKNITALONG is a make-along in the broadest sense. You can knit, crochet, stitch, embroider, just do whatever your little heart desires. But the key thing here is that it is something that your heart very much does desire. It's not an obligation, it's not something that's weighing you down, that you kind of look at the thing that you're going to go and work on and just feel a bit ugh about the whole thing. This is an opportunity for you to absolutely throw caution to the wind and cast on with maximum gusto and aplomb, because this gives you an opportunity to just ignore the shoulds and all of the kind of, oh, I could be knitting on this and so on. This is an opportunity for you to be working on whatever you like, and I will take full accountability for anything that suffers in those consequences, whether it is piles of washing up, whether it is obligation knitting, whether it is anything that you feel compelled to do as opposed to wanting to do, I will take accountability for you doing your own thing in space of that. And so I hope that you have a chance to cast on. The knit along itself, the make along itself, it runs from, or has been running from early November all the way through to the end of January. So if you haven't started anything yet, fear not, you have plenty of time remaining, and there's no requirement for you to actually finish anything at all. This is really just about making a little bit of time for yourself, indulging in a little bit of festive self-care if you like, and just giving yourself a chance to work on something that brings you a lot of joy. We'll be looking at some of the things that you've been working on later on this episode, and so I'm very much looking forward to showcasing some of those, because honestly, your projects continue to blow me away. They are spectacular. But yes, in terms of this episode, there is going to be a little bit of knitting. There is going to be an FO, which it's kind of almost FO, but it's FO-ish enough that we're totally going to call it an FO, because otherwise we would struggle. And by we, I mean me in that regard. And so we'll be talking about that. There are some acquisitions that I can show off. There's also some pattern prettiness. And so the links for all of those things you can absolutely find in the description box below, where I'll include links to everything that I talk about in this week's episode. You will also find a link to our Ravelry group, where we have the most fabulous group of individuals. You'll be able to find threads and all kinds of different kind of chatter going on about the Blamed Underknit Along, about each episode, where I post again a little bit more by way of show notes, as well as some fabulous additional topics alongside those. You will also be able to find show notes over on Instagram, where if you look for the Knitting Vicariously podcast account, it is an account that's dedicated to the podcast, where with each post I will link to all of the relevant hashtags and makers mentioned in that specific episode. But there we are. With no further ado, let's get into a little bit of knitting content. And yes, indeed, I have an FO, or at least something that is close enough to being an FO that I am comfortable with blagging it. This is my Jenica hat. My Jenica hat is a pattern that I talked about for the last couple of episodes. I will put a picture of it up here on the screen so you can see the pattern picture itself. This is a hat pattern by the wonderful Jen Emerson, and it is a hat pattern that I have knit previously. I have a cream version of this, which is an absolute staple in my wardrobe, and so I knew I wanted something that was just similarly wonderful in terms of its fit and how it suits me and so on, but I also knew that I wanted to branch out a little in colour. And therefore, here you have it. This is the hat in all of its finished glory. Now, it has not yet been blocked, which is why it still looks a little bit on the small side. It will stretch a little bit more as we go, but I am so tremendously happy with this. I did make some modifications. I will talk to you about those momentarily. The other thing, of course, that it does not yet have, and this is, I mean, obvious to anyone who, you know, has watched this or have met me or we've, you know, communicated once on the telephone, it's missing a massive fuck off pom-pom. So I'll show you that in a second. But just so you can appreciate how beautiful this hat is, let me hold it up here for you to see. This has been knit using Rhinebeck yarn from my trip earlier on this year in October. This is yarn from the Earl Grey Fibre Company. It is their Oolong DK base, which is a beautiful superwash merino DK weight, and this is in their sweater weather colourway. It feels entirely appropriate. As you can see, the Jenica pattern is a beautiful one. It centres on these rope cable braids the whole way up. It has this fabulous ribbing at the bottom that feeds directly into the rope cables, and then at the top it decreases beautifully as well. Jen has done such an incredible job on this pattern and making everything flow so perfectly. I do love a hat, and I do love a cable pattern where everything just flows so beautifully together. One, because it makes it incredibly intuitive to knit, but two, because the finished object is so deeply satisfying. So I've mentioned in the last few episodes, I'm clearly having a bit of a pink phase at the moment, and I'm entirely fine with that. I fully appreciate that. But I think part of it as well is while I have my cream version of this at the moment, and I've got a dark grey coat, and so it's great to wear with different accessories, I do want the opportunity to liven up the colour a little bit of my general kind of winter accessories wardrobe, not least because in wintertime I tend to wear quite a lot of dark colours, case in point, and so having some more colourful accessories is definitely going to be a winner in that regard. So as I mentioned, I do have a pom-pom to go on the top of this. The pom-pom that I have is, of course, from Cowling Country Crafts. This is a maker that I talk about with incredible frequency, mostly where pom-poms are concerned. She does some truly wonderful faux fur pom-poms, and this one here is no exception. It's showing up ever so slightly more orangey on the screen than it is in reality. In reality, it's a bit more of a sort of taupey beige than it is a warm orange colour, but it has these delightful sort of dark grey tips. And hopefully by holding it on here, you will see what it is that I'm going for. I think these two work really well together. I think it's going to be pretty amazing. Now, part of the reason I love these pom-poms so much is because they have these little clasps on the bottom. So if I hold it there, you will be able to see, you'll also be able to see, oops, if I turn it the right way up, you'll definitely be able to see. This is her Lynx pom-pom. She has a few different colours or kind of effects, if you like, and this is her Lynx, which is, as I say, a sort of taupey beige colour and has these beautiful little dark grey frosted tips. So I will be sewing that on in the next few days. I'll be blocking the hat first, sewing that on, and that will be about my head pretty much for the entirety of this winter, I suspect. Now, I mentioned when showcasing this work in progress previously that I've made a couple of modifications to Jen's excellent patterns. The first of those was a folded brim. So Jen's original pattern has you knit, I think it's a long tail or a German twisted cast on for the bottom, which is what I did on my previous version of my Jenica hat. And while I love it, I really do love the look of something that's a little bit more kind of continuous, that's less of a sort of very distinct line going across the brim of a hat. And without going into any detail, because this is a paid for pattern, there was no way of doing that kind of simply that I could think of with a tubular or an alternating cable cast on, and therefore my sort of preferred option was to go for this folded brim. So I will hold it up, hopefully you'll be able to see. You can see that I've got a nice long end here to sew on my pom-pom momentarily, but if I hold this up, you should be able to see. So this here is actually my cast on. I then knit ribbing all the way, so much ribbing, all the way to the base of the cable pattern here. So what I have now is I have a sort of double walled, super squishy, hat brim. And I'm very excited about that. In terms of sizing, I also knit the largest size, so I knit the size large. But that being said, I did so on a slightly smaller needle. This is also a change that I made to the previous version that I knit. I think the needle sizes that Jen has you use, I used one size down for both. Part of that is because I wanted a really sort of close knit, quite dense hat, but also I wanted to ensure that I wasn't going to I guess kind of make something that was a little bit too large for my head. This had worked out previously before in terms of sizing, and so I knew, having seen how it worked out previously, that was what I was planning to go with again. As it is, even with the folded brim, I was able to have quite a little bit of yarn left over, probably about sort of 10 grams or so, I would reckon. And so I was a little bit worried at one point I was going to run out, but actually by the time I got up to the crown decreases, it's quite a shallow chart. There's not too many rows in it, which was perfect. So yeah, really happy with how this has turned out. So at the risk of messing my hair up entirely, I will show you what this looks like on, because, you know, it's Christmas. But also I'm really pleased with how this has worked out. So here you have it. I am expecting it to loosen up quite a bit after blocking. As it is, it's quite a close fitting beanie. I do quite like the beanie style. Anything that's too slouchy or kind of too sort of squishy out here at the back tends to just not look quite right on me, so this is definitely my preference, but it will loosen up and grow ever so slightly with blocking as well. As it is, it comes just down to my ears, which is perfect, and the folded brim makes this so cozy. It's just, I don't think I'm ever going to take it off my head. I mean, I will, because I've got the rest of the podcast to film and sitting wearing a hat all the time. I mean, I know I did that time last year, but it was kind of a hair situation, and this time it's kind of fine, and like, while I like it, I want to block it. I'm just going to take off the fucking hat. So there you have it. Jenica is done. It needs a little bit of blocking and a lot of pom-pom, but after that, it's going to be perfect. I love it. Moving along into whips, it's fair to say that getting the Jenica hat finished has probably taken the vast majority of my time. I do have one other thing I've cast on. I have one other thing that needs to be worked on, and I will start with the latter. So both of them are actually crammed into my hide and hammer bag. Here, my mustard yellow one, I picked this one up at the Make Joy event with Nu, who is Hide and Hammer, earlier on this year. I love this bag so completely. It is just, I mean, aside from the fact that it's gold and marvellous and wonderful, it has a roll top and therefore is, I believe the technical term is, cavernous, and I love it very dearly. So, as I mentioned, in here there are a couple of things that I'm working on. The first of those is my Stoker shawl. Stoker is a pattern by the wonderful Kristen Lehrer, who is of course Vine. I will put her pattern picture here so you can see it. It is a stunning DK weight shawl with this beautiful kind of bubble center panel, and I'm absolutely in love with it. It is going to go so well with my pink Jenica hat and be a winter staple of choice. Now, I am not much further along with this than I was last time round. I do have, just to show you here, oh, I've got one stitch that's come off the needle. I do have my kind of starting gambit, if you like. Here it's a dark grey and therefore incredibly hard to see, but it is certainly underway. I will hold it up to the camera and hopefully you will be able to see these beautiful bubbles. The yarn is Sustainable from Utopia. It is the most wonderful blend of different very sheepy fibres. It is slightly tweedy. It is absolutely stunning, and I'm so looking forward to having this about my person. However, the only slight issue with this so far is really purely my own stupidity. So I was working on this quite happily. Kristen's charts are absolutely beautifully written, but in all honesty, I was slightly absent-minded, and therefore I will hold this up. You may be able to see that one of the pattern repeats between the bubbles, specifically this one here, so just in between these two, is 2 rows longer than all of the others. Yes, I managed to add in an extra row, or extra 2 rows by the time I'd done front and back, and so there is just this extra bit here. Now, 2 things about that. Ordinarily, I would give precisely 0 fucks about this whole thing. It really wouldn't bother me in the slightest because I'd fudge it and it would be fine. But with this, because I know that there is a lace panel that's based on this later on, because this is going to be right up front and center here, and because in all honesty, it's really not that much work to go back and rip, I am going to rip it back. I am going to start working it over again because frankly, I just want this to be right. It's one of those things where actually, if I can make a little bit of effort and get it to be right, we're talking about what, maybe 12-16 rows that I'm nipping back, and in all honesty these are pretty quick to work through at the length that it is just now. Yes, there's a couple of bubbles that I'll need to rework. No, that's not the end of the world. So on my list of things to do, it's why I haven't been making too much progress with this, is because I want to sit down, rip back, and ideally in the same session just power on through and get back to the point of being where I am just now. So I'll have done it all in one go and I'll be able to crack on with it from there. So my Stoker shawl is going to be getting a lot of love over the Christmas period, I'm quite sure, not least because I can't wait to wear this. It's so wonderful. I've mentioned the yarn that I'm using. The needles that I'm using are my Chow-Goo needles. I'm knitting it on the recommended needle size, which is a 4mm or a US size 6, and it's knitting up beautifully. You can see a little bit kind of, it's not super dense, but at the same time it is just perfectly drapey, and this yarn is an absolute delight. So I'm very much looking forward to spending a bit more time looking after this beauty. To complete my 2019 winter accessories wardrobe, because that's the mission that I seem to be on at the moment, I have cast on another pattern that I have talked about in the last few episodes. Yes, I have finally cast on my oak hollow mitts. These are beautiful wrist warmer designs by Diana Walla, who is Cake and Vikings on Instagram and has the Paper Tiger Designs line. And I love these mitts so much. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're looking at these and going, 90% colour. No, not 90% colour. Thank you very much. Yes, there is gold. Yes, I love them in the, I mean, I really bloody love them in the original colour scheme with the gold leaves, and beautiful. But I am not knitting them in gold. Ha, there, all of you, suck it. No, indeed, because I thought, again, I have a dark grey shawl, I've got a pinkish hat. I kind of want something that brings all of those things together in one festive pair of mitts, and therefore I have cast on. Now, I haven't yet got to the colour work, and what I've done so far looks wholly unremarkable, but I mentioned last time that I knit some Belisa mitts, which is a pattern by Isolde Teague, and I made some modifications to those, one of which was similar to my Jenica hat. Around the cuff, I actually had a little folded brim, or a folded cuff as it would be on these, partly because it's kind of a little bit thicker and it stops the wind from getting in there, partly because they just become really nice to sort of ease on and off, and partly because I just really bloody like the look of it. So I have here a little diddy folded cuff. Yes, indeed, this is the start of my oak hollow mitts, and in fact it's so little and diddy the camera is struggling to focus. Here we are. So these are the, as I say, the very initial stages of my oak hollow mitts. What you then get, again similar to the hat, is this lovely squishy cast on that just makes such a nice snug fit around my wrists. It's a modification that I really do enjoy. Yes, it means you're knitting ribbing for twice as long. Yes, it is a little bit fiddly to try and then pick up, as you can see in here, that initial cast on and knit that together. So all I do is I get to the top of the ribbing, I then fold it inside back on itself, and when I'm knitting into the row of stitches on the main needle, I also knit into the corresponding stitch at the bottom of the column for that ribbing, and that way I am just pulling the needle straight through both of those two and knit them together in one fell swoop. So it's a little bit difficult to see, but you should be able to see that I'm now on to the rounds of knitting. I say now on to, I'm on like round 2, past picking up those stitches for that folded cuff there. The yarn I'm using is the same yarn that I used for my Belisa mittens last year. I am using Aroma PT2, which is their Finial PT2 yarns, and I am using some really beautiful colours. So this first one is colourway 405, catchily named, which is this sort of medium to dark grey in a sort of heathery colour, which I absolutely love. It is a very true neutral in that sense. The other colours that I'm using, so first of all there's this, so this is going to be one of the main contrasts. This is, I believe, 403. It's a very light grey, again a true neutral in that regard. Now, the third colour that I'm using, it was almost certainly going to be this. And again, this is part of the Roma, this is their new kind of Heathers range within Finial PT2. The colourway is 4128, and it is this perfect heathered greyish pink, and I'm in love with it because it's kind of greyish and mauvey, and like it just feels like Kristen in a skein of yarn. It is perfectly beautiful and I love it very much. However, I am a little bit concerned about the contrast between this and the grey. just in terms of those two being side by side, and the grey here is very much the dominant base colour. I'm slightly concerned they might be a little bit too similar. I do have a backup plan. That backup plan is equally Scandinavian and woolly, because what I have here is a skein of tuku wool, and this is, again, it's a similarly kind of beautiful woolly wool heathered base, and if the camera focuses you'll be able to see it. Here we go, and this is in the Uho colorway. It is a Finnish yarn that again has this kind of beautiful, super woolly, cozy heatheredness to it. It is absolutely stunning. And in terms of colorway, the two are pretty close. The main difference is this is obviously a little bit warmer. It's got a little bit less of the kind of dark heathered grey running through it. And so, if I can manage to hold all of these together, I think the contrast is slightly better between those two. It's still close enough to my hat that I'm going to be fine in terms of its general kind of colour wheel family thing. I do quite like being able to wear things that are kind of coordinating as opposed to being matchy. Matchy is not really my aesthetic. I'm not quite organised enough for that, whereas at least here they are kind of coordinating enough for them to work nicely and play nicely together without it being too kind of heavily matchiness. But yes, so I'm thinking I'll continue working with the grey at the moment. I'm bringing in the other lighter grey first, and then I may do a couple of rounds in the Rauma just to see how that works and use the tuku wool as a backup if need be. I do think the contrast with those two is going to be slightly better than the contrast with these two, but we shall see. As you can see, I am using my customary tiny needles to work on this here. Now, I know folk have a bit of a mixed experience with these. Some folks love them, some can't stand them. It just depends on your knitting style. I will confess they work really well with my particular knitting style, which is generally quite sort of fingertips based, but it does mean that it makes them nice and quick, because in doing colour work you're just kind of scooting round and round. There's no need to faff about with magic loop, which is not my personal preference. In terms of needle sizes, so these are higher sharps, and they are the 9-inch circulars. I used a slightly different needle size from that in Diana's pattern. I am knitting the size large, but I am knitting it on slightly smaller needles, and again that's just to do with the gauge and the fit that I have with my Belisa mittens, having worked on those previously. So I actually used a size 2.5mm needle for the ribbing itself, which I believe is a US size 1.5, because apparently there are halves in your sizing as well. It makes no sense. And then I'm using a 2.75mm needle for the main body of the mittens themselves, and I believe that's a US size 2, because numbers. But yes, so I do have a fair bit more to go on these, and I think once I suss out which of the colour choices I'm going to go for, these will fly. I do also intend to make the same modification that I made on my Belisa mitts, because that's part of the reason they get so much wear, which is when I get to the top section of the mitt where there's going to be a little bit more ribbing, I am going to continue that ribbing for quite a bit longer than is in the original pattern. So the Belisa mitts that I have, that of course I never bring with me to talk about, but I always end up talking about them, is from about here upwards on the mitt I knit ribbing really quite long, and then I actually then fold it back on itself, and it means that one, I have the option of folding that up if I want to keep my fingertips nice and cozy, but two, I also have a little kind of fold over flap that if need be I can tuck my thumb into, and yeah, it's just, I like what I like. And that's it for works in progress. As I say, there's really not been much besides getting my Jenica hat finished, and so yeah, I'm really looking forward to taking some time out to being able to do a little bit more knitting. I'm quite keen to cast on my second Felix pullover. Those of you who've seen the previous episode know that I might have had a small indiscretion. I might have purchased some of the green Jill Draper yarn to maybe knit a second Felix, so that might need to happen. I do also have some acquisitions to share with you this week. This was not intentional, believe you me. However, last weekend I mentioned that I was able to meet up with some wonderful knitty friends. I had the opportunity to meet Tanny Casey in person. She was in London with her husband, and given we had such a sort of ships in the night moment at Rhinebeck this year, it was so fabulous to be able to catch up with her in person. She and I went out for brunch with another wonderful friend of mine who is Jess, and Jess is Film Fromage over on Instagram. She has the most incredible, just gothy, epic aesthetic and is essentially everything that my little tiny goth bit of my heart wants to be when I grow up. So it was so fantastic to spend a little bit of time with the two of them. Jess and I also went out and did some yarn shopping, and so she is at least in part accountable for this. But the other thing I did last weekend, just before I get into that, was I went up to York for a day. I went up to York to visit the Christmas markets. It was a wonderful day. If you are interested in seeing a little bit more about it, I will put a link below and maybe somewhere up in the corners of the thing with the stuff, because I did film that for my Vlogmas episode. It's fair to say Vlogmas has been a bit more challenging this week. There will be something. It will not be yet, but there will be something. But yes, so while I was up in York, I was delighted to come across a very just adorable little stand when I was there. This was a stand where the sort of proprietor had split it into two. There were blankets and hats and things that were made with this beautiful, huge, properly chunky yarn, huge knitted blankets, you know, the sort of gauge where like a knit stitch is about kind of this big, and just so wonderfully cozy looking. And then on the other side of the stand, they also had some wool yarn, some really nice chunky, they had the huge balls of yarn with sort of thickness that much, sort of the yarn that was that thick if you like, but they also had some really nice just kind of chunky and super chunky weight yarns. And I mean, what's a girl to do? It caught my eye. It was stunning. And so I came away with, because I'm having a pink moment, I mean, it's fine, don't worry about it. I came away with this beautiful skein of loveliness. This is 200 grams of the softest, most beautifully strokeable merino yarn. And this is from a company called Wool, which is just delightful. So let me hold it up here. You'll be able to see. It is, as you can see there, 200 grams of this super chunky merino wool, and it is in this perfect mauvey colorway. Now, I am still not totally sure if this is a colorway that I can pull off. I think clearly I've been channeling a little too much Kristen in this regard, with her love of all things mauvey and just generally stunning. I don't know. Maybe it works, maybe it'll wash me out terribly. It's difficult to know. I could always use it with something else, but given that this is 200 grams, she wasn't entirely sure on yardage, but I reckon certainly with this you're looking at well in excess of probably 120 meters, maybe 130 yards or so. I'd expect to get that out of maybe 150 grams, and this is 200, so certainly enough for a hat or a really nice big cozy cowl, potentially even quite a long thin scarf. I think you'd be fine. But yeah, it's just, I can't describe to you how wonderfully, wonderfully soft this is. It is both spun and dyed from sheep that are in Yorkshire as well. So this is a great British made wool, which is something that just in terms of sustainability is wonderful and very, very good to see. And yeah, I'm so delighted to have found this little booth. So she was right in the midst of the Christmas market, and it was just really, really wonderful to see. So if you're in the market for trying something new, in terms of affordability as well, 200 grams of super chunky yarn was £14. And so again, affordability wise, this is for something that could quite easily kind of make a full-blown hat, and a great, potentially quite a quick gift knit if that's still something that's on your radar and you've got a little bit more time. Definitely worth checking them out. So on to the Sunday, and after catching up with Tanny over breakfast, Jess and I wandered up to northeast London and did a little impromptu yarn crawl. For anyone who is coming to London, I'd highly recommend that this is a great route to take. So you can jump on the underground and the overground up to Stoke Newington in northeast London. From there, you are just a couple of minutes walk away from the first store, which is Knit with Attitude. Knit with Attitude is a fantastic store. It's beautifully curated. It's a mixture of yarn store and kind of arts and some independent makers and crafts that are in there as well, but they stock a wide range of things, everything from, there's a little bit of John Arbon, there are some beautiful Scandinavian yarns, so they have Plitalopi, they have Letlopi, they have some of the Hillsfog yarns, and my pronunciation is all over the shop, so ignore all of that, but no, good yarns. And they have garnsures there as well, with some hedgehogs and black elephant, and just a little bit of fibre company. It's a great, great selection of yarns, and wonderful if you're coming from perhaps the US and you want to see something that is a bit different. From there, it is about a 20-minute walk, a really lovely walk across Hackney Downs to get to Wild and Woolly, which is the second store. Wild and Woolly, again, another beautiful shop, great selection of books, but also a focus, their focus is maybe slightly more on British yarns, I would say, possibly. They do have some, I'm not sure if it's Jameson or Jameson Smith, they've got some Donegal tweed in there as well, so some Irish yarns there too. It's a wonderfully just cozy little store, and from there, again, it's very simple to hop on a bus and end up at Loop down in Angel in Camden Passage there. Loop is a beautiful store, but if you are coming from out of town, particularly if you're coming from the US, you may well find that quite a lot of the yarns that they stock there are yarns that are also US yarns, or at least available there. So hence why it's nice to get a bit of a kind of broader view. And so, having started in the first two stores with Jess and made some good squishes and some, you know, kind of gift purchases on Jess's part, I was there, I was being very virtuous. I was thinking, no, you've got all this Rhinebeck yarn, you don't need to worry about it. And then we got to Loop. And whilst in Loop, again, I was doing really, really well. And then I saw that they had a sale basket. And then I saw that in that sale basket, they had nightshades. I mean, I was powerless to resist, because the nightshades colour that they had, a sweater's quantity worth of the nightshades colour that they had was cinder. And cinder is the colour of nightshades with a little bit of orange in there. And so if I try desperately to get the camera to show any kind of indication, actually that's not bad, of what's going on here, you'll be able to see that this is blended with a little bit of an orange glow in there too. Nightshades, for anyone who's unsure, is a line of yarn by Harrisville Designs. They are based in New England, and they have this beautiful black base, this black Cormo base with a little bit of, as I say, colour sewn in there as well. They have a series of different colours, whether it is, I know Stiletto is a new one with hot pink in there. They have Static, which is this amazing kind of white colour. They have Street Light, which is a kind of neony yellow. There are all these different kind of undertones, if you like, to the colours. And Cinder is one that had stolen my heart, but I had been resisting. But then when you see it at like £4 off the retail price, you kind of just think, well, bollocks to it, this is coming home with me. And so it did, 5 skeins of it. So yeah, it's fine, it's fine. So now I have a wholly unexpected sweater's quantity of nightshades in Cinder, and I'm not mad about it, not mad. I mean, looking at my colour palette, I've definitely gone a bit goth. I think Jess might have been rubbing off on me, if I'm honest, in terms of I've gone a bit dark and moody for today. I'm really looking forward to working with this. I don't have a specific pattern in mind. I know Nightshades is incredibly adaptable, and so for all that it is still knitting with black yarn, there's definitely some good options there. So I'm very, very much looking forward to working this up. So that's it for acquisitions, but there are some pattern pretties that have caught my eye from a vicarious knitting standpoint, of course. The first of those, I mentioned last time on the previous episode that I was having a bit of a squiz at some cowls, and no sooner had I said that than a brand new one slapped me in the face, and I went, yeah, I need to, this has to be a thing. Partly because if you've watched my Vlogmas, you will understand that I have a small predilection for all things stags. And so this was just inevitable. This is a pattern, a beautiful cowl pattern by the lovely human that is Samantha Guerin Designs, and I will put her pattern picture up here. She is someone I was delighted to have a chance to chat to very briefly at Indie Untangled this year over in Rhinebeck, and this cowl of hers is stunningly beautiful. It is a long cowl. I mentioned last time round, I love the idea of a long cowl that you can double up and wrap up nice and cozy around your neck, and it's called Stag Leap, because of course it is. And therefore I love it, and it will be mine. It's such a beautiful pattern between the rib stitches and the columns of rib and the cables that kind of spread out across it. It's so beautifully classically designed, and I absolutely adore it. It's knit in worsted weight yarn, and funnily enough, it's actually knit using the Hudson and Westco Forge yarn, which is one of the very distinctly different from each other sweater quantities that I brought back from Rhinebeck this year. It's fine. And so worsted yarns gives a huge kind of range of possibilities for knitting this up in terms of yardage. You are looking at around about 310 to 430 yards, so that would be around about 2 skeins of that to get a wonderfully big squishy cowl. I just think this is such a fantastic pattern, and definitely something I know I want to look at in the new year. The other 2 patterns that have caught my eye, I'm going to have to hold out for a little bit because neither of them are actually available until next month, until January. The first of those stopped me dead in my tracks on Instagram as I was scrolling through it. This is such a stunning pattern. The first of them is Sorrel, and this is a sweater pattern by Wool and Pine. It is such a beautiful design. It has this texture joke. We all know that I love a texture joke, but these beautiful, I don't know if they're cable stitches or slip stitches. Not having seen the pattern, I don't quite know yet what they are, but what I know is that I love them and they are beautiful, and in this yarn it's just elevating. It is stunning. Here the sample has been knit by holding together a fingering weight and lace weight, some of the silk mohair, to get this gorgeous kind of blend of the slight speckle and the fluffy. I think you could either knit it up using a regular sport weight if you don't want any of the mohair in there, or indeed the sort of fingering weight. There is a speckle in one of the samples that she shows over on the Ravelry page, and this green one in particular is just mind-blowingly beautiful. It's one of those things that you see it knitted in exactly that sample yarn, and you just think, I can understand if everyone just went out and bought the sample yarn because that is such a beautiful combination. But yes, it is a very, very well-sized sweater pattern. It runs from 31.5 inches all the way up to a 66-inch bust, and as such, it is incredibly inclusive in that regard, and just something that I can imagine looking stunning on pretty much everyone that chooses to work on it. So whether you choose to work it up as a fade in the sample, or whether you choose to work it up in something that is a little bit more consistent and perhaps maybe just slightly variegated, a little bit more solid, you can play around with it. I can see this looking incredibly beautiful. So this will definitely be something that I'm watching out for come the 15th of January when this pattern is released. And similarly, again, holding together that fingering and lace weight to create something that's beautiful and floofy is another incredible designer who is fast becoming just a new favourite of mine. This is the Cozy Classic Raglan Sweater from Jessie May Designs, Jessie May Martinson. She has designed such incredibly stunning, just beautiful garments, such as the diaphanous raglan that I've talked about previously, which I do have my Once Upon a Corgi yarn for over here, but this is another beauty. And what I will say is, for someone who in the past I've knit the no frills sweater, I've talked about the fact that in the past I'm not super comfortable with the no frills sweater because its pattern and sizing is quite so exclusive in that sense. Its largest size is not great. It's maybe a kind of 42, 45, it's 120 centimetre bust, whereas Jessie May has, in all senses, in all of her patterns, and this is no exception, done an incredible job of creating something that is very, very inclusive in that regard. So in terms of sizing, this runs from a 28 to 30 inch all the way up to a 60 to 62 inch bust. And to be honest, the shaping of it is so similar to that of the no frills. If you wanted to, you could probably add a few extra raglan pleats to get the kind of slight batwing air that you have in that other design. But in all honesty, this just looks like such a perfectly comfortable staple and a great use of any sweater quantities that you have where you're looking to match up some fingering weights and lace weight to hold those together and come up with something that is beautifully floofy and cozy. I have managed to amass a couple of combinations for that over the years in terms of that fingering and lace weight combination. I have a sort of grey tweed that I can hold together with a grey silk mohair. I have a gold set because of course I do, and so I will definitely be looking at this one come the new year. And while that is it for my pattern picks, that is by no means the end of the inspiration. No, indeed, because the time is here for us to take a look at the Blamed Underknit Along and all of the incredible things that you've been working on as part of that. As I mentioned right up front, this is a make along that runs all the way through until the end of January. And therefore, if you still want to crack on with something, if you've already worked on something, but you're desperate to try something new, you still have plenty of time. The only condition with this whole make along is that it needs to be something that you are so excited to sit down and to work on, because the whole purpose of this is about ensuring that you bring yourself some joy in a season that is perhaps a little bit onerous at times. And so with no further ado, I will allow you to enjoy the absolute belters that you've been working on as part of the Blamed Underknit Along. They really are just incredible, and I'm so pleased to see different projects taking shape, seeing them at their different stages and phases, and watching them grow, and just getting to knit truly vicariously with all of you, which just makes me so tremendously happy. As I've talked about previously, you are more than welcome to share your progress both over in our Ravelry group and on Instagram. There will be some prizes. I've talked about them previously. I'm not going to labour the point. I don't yet have them here to be able to share with you, but I will be talking about them in the very near future. The purpose of the make along is more just to give yourself an opportunity to, as I say, just cast on whatever your little nitty heart desires, but at the same time I do know that prizes are always welcomed, and so we do have 3 ways to win a prize. The first of those is to post about it in our BLAMEDUNDERKNITALONG chatter thread on Ravelry, which will be linked again in the show notes below. Chat as often as you like, engage with people there. The whole purpose is around creating a dialogue and a fun place to go to share some of your updates. The second way that you can win is by posting in the finished object thread, also in our Ravelry group. It is 1 post per person, and therefore, regardless of how many objects you manage to finish, you will be going in and editing that original post and updating it with those pictures. Please do be mindful of that fact. It's the best way of making it fair, and so if you have by accident perhaps created more than 1 post in there, I'd ask you to go back and amend that. Otherwise, when it comes to drawing the prizes from there, and I will be using random number generator to do that, I will need to be deleting any kind of additional posts just to ensure that it's fair for everyone. And the third and final way that you can win is by using the BLAMEDUNDERKNITALONG hashtag over on Instagram for all of your progress shots, for your yet to cast on shots, for your FO shots, however you choose to use it, as long as it is BLAMEDUNDERKNITALONG related, you are good to go. So please do continue sharing those. They bring such joy to me and hopefully a huge amount of inspiration to everyone else as well. And so that is pretty much it for this episode. I know that not everyone celebrates Christmas. I still feel a little bit strange saying happy holidays. It's not a greeting that sits naturally with us here in the UK, where we have a slightly more kind of secular view of Christmas as a whole. But I will say it nonetheless, for those of you that are celebrating holidays other than Christmas, a very happy holidays to you. For those of you celebrating nothing at all and either watching the season blur by or indeed using it as an excuse to perhaps settle in and get a little bit of rest and respite, I hope the season treats you wonderfully. And as ever, I hope you have a fantastic rest of day, rest of week. I hope your knitting is keeping you happy and fulfilled, but if for whatever reason it isn't, I hope you have the opportunity to knit vicariously. Keep on keeping on, and I will see you all again very soon. Bye. Now, come on, there was no way that I could leave you without any kind of a little festive treat, and therefore, while it's not necessarily the sweary antics that I got up to in last year's Vlogmas, and those of you who haven't seen that, if you enjoy the swears, it might be one for you to check out. But I wanted to ensure that I was leaving you with something just a little bit festive as part of that, and so here we go. Have yourself a merry little Stitchmas. May your gifts be done. Now's the time for you to cast on something fun. Have yourself a merry little Stitchmas. Make the Yuletide LGBTQ+ friendly. Take those whips and put them somewhere far away. Think of those poor sods back in olden days, so-called golden days of yore. No Ravelry, Instagram or knitting vlogs. How did they do things before? Digitally we all can be together if broadband speeds allow. Even then we'll muddle our way through somehow and have ourselves a merry little Stitchmas now. Have a good one, Pickles.